this presentation of Sam's has really been a unique review of the historic period and of the main issues that were between Lenin and Trotsky in the period prior to the October Revolution. In his talk on Sunday, basically he reviewed some of the differences and some of the points of agreement between Lenin and Trotsky. This is a unique contribution that he has never presented, I think, to our comrades before. This will be the third series that will be taking up from the days when Trotsky joined the Bolshevik Party in 1917 and leading on to the historic revolution.
Thank you, Comrade Sharon. Comrades, today I deal directly with events following the Revolution of 1917 in Russia. And it is a legitimate question to ask. Why, of all the questions, of all the issues that are facing the working class in the United States, and indeed the whole world, that are so pressing and so urgent, why are we discussing this? Events that took place decades and decades ago, and which seem to have only a very remote interest for us. Why give so much time and why stress it? Why? Lenin was often asked the same question when he was elaborating on fundamental political issues. And he often gave this example. He said, it's an example from one of Tolstoy's books. He said some people were observing a man who was making irrational motions that were not understood, and he seemed to be in a very highly emotional state of mind, especially his motion by the hand and the leg seemed to have no sense to it. And Tolstoy said, well, look a little closer, see, and you will see. Come forward and watch more carefully what's going on with this man. And so if you come closer and closer, you see the man is sitting on a chair with something like a wheel moving and with a long knife. He's sharpening a knife. Now that is a very instructive lesson. What seemed to be irrational and so on was in reality preparation for the struggle. Sharpening a knife. Moving your hand and feet to see that the knife is sharpened very properly. And that's what our discussions are about. How to sharpen our tools for the impending struggle. They are very important, and we should not look upon them as academic exercises, but as life and death questions on how we will learn to use the weapons that are available to us and use them in the kind of way which will transform capitalist society into a socialist order. To do this, we have to understand some of the lessons of the Russian Revolution and how Lenin and Trotsky And the party as a whole viewed the developments. What are some of the lessons that we need to learn, first of all? Well, and from whom shall we learn it? Which are the ones that are most essential, see? Take Lenin's writings at that time, right after the overthrow of the Tsarist monarchy, see? Where was he? He was still in exile. But as the situation changed so radically, with the Tsarist government being overthrown, and virtually everybody having the right to say and think what they want, every type of speech making and every type of printing, it was all in there. The capital in particular, St. Petersburg at that time, was full of excitement because everybody was involved in one form or another of political activity. And all of them were looking forward as to what is the next step, what will be done. While Lenin was in exile, see, he might have easily come right back along with the others, but he held back. But all the other comrades, as many as were possible, coming from as far away as Siberia and elsewhere, they were gathering in the capital, in the center. Trotsky again had to use his weapon that was most effective in the building of the party, writing about it, writing on what should be done in a new and utterly unanticipated situation, at least from the point of view of what happened yesterday in, let us say, in St. Petersburg, see. What was to be done now? What should be done? The party was agitating most of all for the overthrow of the old government, of the Tsar's regime. But now it was overthrown. And as I said in an earlier time, I believe there's a great deal of euphoria and jubilation that could be understood. All exiles coming back, political prisoners being let out. Those are no small things. Those are really very important developments. Men who've been in prison for years suddenly coming out, not only Bolsheviks, but Menshevik leaders like Marcy and others, you see. And no sooner have they come out than they come back agitating that the programs that they had before they got into jail in Siberia, see. Lenin was most keenly attuned to what the situation was, but also very frustrated that once again he was in exile and the center was elsewhere. The center was in Petersburg, and the question as to him coming to the center might only be hazardous, but be completely self-defeating. It's to be remembered that of all those leaders who were watched by the police and who the capitalist press continually harangued about, it was Lenin that was attacked most fiercely and most often. It was Lenin and the Leninists who were always in the forefront of attacks by the bourgeois, and the counter-revolutionary press and the social democrats, and all had joined in. And in that way, the Bolsheviks also developed fierce self-defense, polemics and self-defense in relation to the police and to the military. Now, see, being faced with a new situation calls for an alteration of tactics, what we often have faced and will face in the future, and how to assess it quickly with the least amount of factional infighting, although having the freest amount of discussion possible. This is the ABC for a proletarian revolutionary party. Not to thwart, not to hinder discussion, but to elevate it, organize it, do it in a disciplined manner, arrive at a decision, and move forward. This is the essence of Leninist politics in the class struggle. Now, as I said, all of the leaders were coming back to old Russia, finding a new situation. Trotsky came back. Lenin was to come back out somewhat later, but in the meantime, he was writing from his hideout and being more aware that the police and the military would be after him as soon as he made himself available, and that maintaining himself in exile and in secrecy was a most important duty to the proletariat. Solzhenitsyn, the counter-revolutionary czarist spokesman, who I believe is already back in Russia with the reactionary government, he wrote about Lenin in exile, stating that he had lost any connection with Russia and didn't know what was going on and didn't know what was happening with the revolution, and that it wasn't till it actually had broken out that he decided, well, maybe he ought to write something which Solzhenitsyn said was irrelevant to the situation in the first place. All a great deal of lies and slander. Well, what actually Lenin was doing was to address himself to the most important questions. But the most important question was the internal question. See? The most important internal question was to turn the party around on the program in view of the fact that what we were faced with was not a democratic dictatorship of the peasantry, or rather the workers and the peasantry, but with a bourgeois government outright, as Trotsky may have predicted it accurately, and Lenin more in algebraic and more general terms. See, but however it was, the masses were jubilant. And the question was how to prepare for the next phase, because the bourgeoisie was not defeated. The counter-revolutionary czarist military was not defeated. The bourgeoisie itself was still in place. They still were the owners of the factories. It's true that some ran away. Some left early. Some of the banks closed, took the money with them, left. Those are some of the incidental things. But what was it that Lenin was most concerned with? He was most concerned that the party had a new revolutionary program that was concerned with changing old slogans, and at the same time to bring about new revolutionary tactics and strategy in the struggle against the new government of Russia which he recognized as the government of the bourgeoisie, and warned in his writings that the masses do not recognize this as yet, that the masses are very much full of hope and give a lot of credence to the new government, and that he urged the party to carefully take that into consideration. That while we must prepare for a struggle against the new government, a government of the bourgeoisie, we must recognize that the masses are in support of the new government, and that our tactics must be such as to take all this in account, while at the same time exposing most mercilessly the new character of the government, but by no means urging its violent overthrow, even though the Bolsheviks may have enough soldiers in the Petersburg area to do that very thing. It is necessary to educate the masses, to explain to the masses what is happening, and more importantly, to explain it all to the party and to the leaders so that we will be fully armed in the coming struggle. But agitation and propaganda of a revolutionary working class character is most important. And that is what Lenin was devoting himself in his letters from afar, writing to the party on how to approach the new situation. Although he is so far away from the center of the struggle, although he is in exile and is isolated and has to watch his step and be continually frustrated by the lack of communication, he nevertheless feels that his own role as educator, as leader, as theoretician of the revolutionary proletariat, that his own survival is very much a key question for the revolution. Some of this is in writing by others and some not. But that is what the real situation with Lenin is. We're trying to write from exile to a center where all the party leaders have come together from different parts of the country and who are new to each other in some respects, haven't seen each other and just, exchanging views and so on. Lenin in his writing letters expects communications, expects answers. And he doesn't get answers. He gets no answers to his letters. And he gets more and more frustrated that maybe he shouldn't be there, maybe he should go directly, maybe he should stay. What should he do? There is communications from the center are very meager. He has to wait for newspapers in exile to see what's happening in the capital. And that is extremely frustrating to a leader who is by far the chief architect of the revolution, of the party, and of initiating and developing the cadres of the party. Finally, he gets so frustrated and not getting proper communications, he writes a letter to the Central Committee that he recognizes that he's out of touch and that the comrades are not responsive to his letters, and therefore, under the circumstances, he's taking a hint that maybe they don't want him as the leader of the Central Committee and of the party, and therefore he is offering his resignation. I don't know if he actually sent this letter out, but he did dictate it. He did write it. And if the comrades ever got it, they would not take it seriously as a threat to resign, but as a means of getting back to communicating with him and to see to it that the remedial steps be taken to have communication with the leader. But this is one of the problems. Trotsky solved the problem by coming as soon as possible and getting right into the midst of the struggle. This might have made others happy, and it certainly was no reason for the party not to be happy about it. He had joined the party really in many ways, but still Trotsky was Trotsky. As one who had been an opponent for so long, and for him to be at the helm of leadership in St. Petersburg while Lenin was not there seemed to be extraordinarily an extraordinarily delicate question on how to relate to the struggle. Well, as it turned out, the letter had no significance politically because the comrades understood Lenin. And they weren't about to change leaders under any circumstances. He was the very heart and soul of party leadership. And what was necessary, most of all, was how to strengthen the party with respect to the new capitalist government. It was necessary to call for a new Congress of the party or conference in April, and to bring out new theses on how to attack the capitalist government and how to prepare the party for insurrection. Now, none of this seemed at the time as a realistic proposition, considering that the masses were so fully imbued with a revolution, but a policy of waiting and seeing. But after a while, it became clear that the new government was very much like the old government, that above everything else, it wanted to continue the war, which the soldiers were ready to give up and go back to the farms. So far as the factories, the workers wanted to take them over, but the government opposed the occupation and ready to use force. The people wanted low prices on food and to make the food available. And the new government had the same policy of the old one, to encourage higher prices without giving the masses any concessions. In short, in a very short period of time, the masses were getting disillusioned with the government. First, they are very euphoric about a change, but change had to come quickly, and it didn't come. But what did come was a new thesis by Lenin, a new approach for the party on how to handle the situation and to make sure that the party could meet the oncoming crisis. See? There are many aspects of which I can go into, but this is not a talk on the history of the Russian Revolution, which could take weeks, properly so, and even longer, because there is a great deal that a working class revolutionary party can learn. And we want to solicit, to dig out, rather, only those lessons which are most important for our party in our contemporary struggle, so that we may guide ourselves accordingly. The principal problem, as Lenin conceived it, was the relationship of the party to the masses, and the relationship of the masses to the capitalist government. See? Talk of revolution now that a revolution had occurred was on everybody's lips. Everybody was talking revolution. Everybody was for revolution. Even some from the royalty. But what kind of revolution? Revolution against whom? And revolution for whom? There had to be clarity. This was what had to be done. Most of all, people were talking that the party was, the Bolshevik party was the revolution. The Mensheviks thought that they were the revolution. The peasant party, so-called, of the Kerensky, they thought that they were the leaders of the revolution. Everybody thought of themselves as the leaders of the revolution. Once the revolution, which overthrew the Tsar's government, had taken place, but who was in favor of a new revolution to overthrow the present government? That was a distinctly other matter. That was discussed only by the Bolsheviks and some of the left wing in the Menshevik party, and by the group that Trotsky had headed, a small group, and they spoke about the new revolution, but the only one that was clear on that was Trotsky himself, for the revolution that is against the new government, how to overthrow the new government. Now, that being on the agenda, historically, the overthrow of the new government. So that was what the Bolsheviks were concerned with. The Mensheviks did not see that at all as the case. They saw themselves as a minority and saw the Bolsheviks as a minority. They said, both of us are a minority. The vast majority are the peasants. And these new officials in the government represent the peasants, and Kerensky above all. The new prime minister within a short period, he's supposed to represent the peasants. Therefore, said the Mensheviks, what we need is a coalition government with the peasant party, so-called, the social revolutionaries, and also to support the new government, and that we be the left wing in support of the new government. We criticized them, and so on. To get really an accurate picture as to what that meant was like this. Like in France, or in Germany, and in England, and later perhaps in the United States, where a Workers' Party has tremendous power, but instead of fighting to overthrow the capitalist government and institute a proletarian dictatorship, what they want to do is to unite with the Mensheviks want to unite with the liberals, and the liberals hold out their hands to the reactionaries, and they all support the capitalist government in one way or another on the ground that we have no majority. We workers don't have the majority, and so on and so forth. And therefore, we have to have a coalition government to get some sort of a concession. But to overthrow that government, oh no, that is altogether out of the question. Because the Mensheviks are in favor of a compromise, see. A compromise with the property classes. And this is what Lenin's writings and his letters are all about, on how to prepare the party for the seizure of power, how to undo this government of the bourgeoisie, and hopefully, viewing the mass movement, they are becoming every day more susceptible to the propaganda of the Bolsheviks against the new government. But first of all, the propaganda of the party, it has to turn its guns against the new government. It's sharp attacks, and this is what is happening. See? Now, the biggest and most important lesson in connection with this new situation is the relation of the party to the masses, and how is it preparing itself for the revolution. Now, at that time there were quite a number of revolutionaries and Marxists outside of the Bolshevik party, like Rosa Luxemburg and others, who also saw the situation as a revolutionary one, who also saw the nature of the new government as a capitalist government, but also were not in favor of the seizure of power by an insurrection, at least under those circumstances. It goes to show you that even when you are a revolutionary and when you are a Marxist all your life, the time nevertheless comes when you have to make a decision on how to apply a Marxism, and it could be entirely in the wrong direction, as it is with Rosa Luxemburg, who felt that the Bolsheviks were preparing not for a normal proletarian revolution, but were orienting towards a coup d'etat, something which beheads the mass movement and does not, in reality, respond to the historic needs of the masses. But Lenin was very, very keen. He could tell he could recite the views of Rosa Luxemburg in his sleep before she even writes them. That's my interpretation of it. And he understood it. And he saw as his main objective to go over the political situation with a minimum of revolutionary phrases where everybody was talking revolution, and to analyze what the situation is between the party and the masses. Rosa Luxemburg's view, and some others, was that the Bolsheviks were trying to substitute themselves for the masses, to do the things that only the masses can do, and that this was really obstructing the development of proletarian class consciousness and depriving them of initiative. Again and again throughout all of the history of the working class movement, you will hear charges that this or that revolutionary group is substituting itself for the masses and doing things that are for the masses to be done, and therefore this group is usurping the power of the masses. See? But Lenin was prepared for these arguments and knew that they had validity in some respects, but not in others. And so he developed a series of writings about Marxism and Blanquism. And what in the world, someone asked, what is Blanquism? Blanqui was a revolutionary in a place, you might guess, France, where all the great revolutions have taken place. But against all the great revolutions in France which involved the masses, Blanqui's idea was, look, the masses will support you if you do it yourself. If you wait for the masses, you are a laggard. You will never achieve anything. The masses want leadership, and leadership is what we got to do. We have to prepare for an insurrection. We have to be meticulous in our planning. We must take in not everybody into our confidence, but only those who have proven themselves to be in the struggle against the bourgeoisie. We must act in a conspiratorial way, not openly and so on. Hence, it was very clear from the early days that Lenin was attempting to utilize the lessons of Blanqui's experiences as regards the Russian Revolution. Blanqui had gone through several attempts at a coup d'etat, each one of them, of course, having failed. Most of the time he was imprisoned, escaped or got freed, tried to rebuild again another conspiratorial group in an attempt to overthrow the French capitalist government. What was it that Marxists saw in Blanqui that was progressive? What was progressive in Blanqui was that he was a revolutionary socialist, that he was a determined revolutionary, that he was disciplined and was serious, that he was for the revolution. But the revolution had to come from dedicated revolutionaries who had no other motive than to prepare for the revolution, not in theory for some time in the future, but to begin as soon as the group is ready, regardless as to whether the masses are ready or not. The masses, he said, are fine, but they got to be led. They're not going to do it. And he would go over the French Revolution and show that, however the masses were involved, it was really a small group that started it. That there are always the small groups that start it. That the masses come in later. That you can't wait for the masses. You can't expect that of them. They work all day. They got obligations to family and other and other problems, but the business of overthrowing a government has to be by a select group. And the significant thing about it is that he was able to get a small group. And if it collapsed and it was imprisoned, there was another time again. Only you can try that in France, which had a long history of revolutionary struggle. Lenin saw in Blanqui a determined revolutionary, something that Bolsheviks had to take over. His determination, his readiness, that we need a small group, but not exactly like his. We need a small group that can lead a larger group and an ever larger group. That the party was the small lever that would rotate and get a larger lever. And pretty soon it'd be moving the biggest wheels of all with this little lever. The party was the transmission belt for it. So that the little group, the small group, was the party. But unlike Blanqui, it had to have mass influence. It had to be everywhere with the masses. It had to combine the relationship of a small group to the larger group and organize in the larger group with mass organizations. So what Lenin did in this particular period, right after the February Revolution, and to my knowledge, he's the only one that did it. All his writings about it are Blanquism and Marxism, see? Instead of talking only about how to take over quickly and what to do, he first of all laid a theoretical foundation for the party. So when he came out of exile into the party center, the party already had material to be educated on what the current situation is. So he explained that the party was the smaller group, that it had to take into account the mass movement and how to win it. We first have to win the mass movement to us, and not assume that we are the mass movement. In other words, all that the Bolsheviks were being accused of, Lenin was taking measures to see that that accusation was altogether false. That while the party had conspiratorial aims, as it should, it was nevertheless highly influential in the mass movement and very much akin to its needs, its position. See? So he wrote them letters and articles on Marxism and Blanquism. Marxism is distinguished from Blanquism. He went on again and again to say, not by having greater revolutionary determination, not by greater self-sacrifice and organization. We're distinguished by them because we cannot ignore the masses, but on the contrary, become more and more inseparable from them and win them to our side. And this is the distinguishing characteristic between Marxism and Blanquism. Blanquism had not attained a successful proletarian revolution anywhere. And if we are going to attain a proletarian revolution in Russia, we have to realize the policies of Blanquism and proceed in a revolutionary Marxist and proletarian way. See, this was very important from the point of view of educating the party and giving the party weapons against those who were saying, you are substituting for yourself for the masses, you think you're everything just because you have a stronger party and that you have friendliness and cooperation from certain elements of the army. Oh, you think you're everything, but you are not Russia. Russia is the great peasant country with millions of millions, and you Bolsheviks are a small minority. And I would answer, we may be a small minority, but we are a larger one than the bourgeoisie. See? The bourgeoisie is even smaller, is discredited, is our oppressor. This is the problem. We're not fighting the majority. We're on the side of the majority. We're fighting the bourgeoisie. The issue is not minority or majority. The issue is which class. The class of the bourgeoisie is a minority. The class of the proletariat is numerous and large as against the bourgeoisie. There is, of course, the peasantry, and that we have to pay close attention. Suppose I take a 5-minute break. How's that? Okay. Well, as we have seen, now that the insurrection, the overthrow of the Tsar has taken place, and the proletariat seems to be in motion, and the Bolsheviks seem to be more and more the representative of the workers. The question that now must be faced internally regards the party program and the party position in general. As regards the most important question, the workers, we deal with it to some extent, but we also have to deal with the other question. Now that everything seems to be moving in a revolutionary direction, as far as the capital is concerned, and also in Moscow and in some of the provinces, the question that has to be dealt with is the question of the peasantry. And that is a question that, for the first time, must appear to Trotsky that he is vulnerable. It is a proletarian revolution, but the urgent need is the peasantry. How to win the peasantry. It was all good and well to argue with the Bolsheviks on the nature of the forthcoming revolution, and to show in so many ways that that's what will happen and is happening. But the other side of the polemic with Lenin was on the dictatorship of the democratic dictatorship of the workers and peasants. And now, after the overthrow of the Tsar, it must appear to Trotsky that the urgent need is to have an alliance with the peasants. And how Lenin's formula, the democratic dictatorship of the workers and peasants, appeals to the peasants. And when they come to the capital, they want to see Lenin. Trotsky has a problem when he faces a delegation of peasants. Lenin is the one who has the slogan that counts them in. Trotsky's slogan, and especially the slander against him, counts him out. And it is a very important problem. It is then where sometimes slogans come back to haunt you or to help you. So whereas the democratic dictatorship of the peasant, workers and the peasants was too algebraic, and so far as how the revolution unfolded, yet Trotsky could not but see the wisdom of Lenin's position, could see that not only the wisdom, the sagacity and the craftiness behind it, that it was a way to win the peasants, to win them. And sometimes no amount of talk by Trotsky could undo that, see. Not much is written about that aspect of it, but it is certainly very much important in the practical relationships of the party leaders with the masses. Having a poor image with the peasantry at a time after the insurrection was harmful to Trotsky as a leader. It militated against his rousing popularity, see. In the army, in the ranks of workers, and in intellectual cycles particularly. He was the one who could write for many more publications than anybody else and get a hearing abroad quicker, if I understand it properly, than even Lenin. It was Trotsky who was in New York and not Lenin, who propagated for the party as a whole. It was Trotsky who was in Spain, in France, in Italy, all over. And wherever he went, he built a tremendous reputation in the general population, mostly working class. But now he's faced with another problem. The peasantry. See? Lenin has no problem. Delegations that come to see Lenin and Trotsky, they right away run to Lenin or somebody else because they see them as their leaders. Trotsky has another problem. Peasants are known to be much more susceptible to anti-Semitism than workers. He has to guard against that. And yet to maintain his position as a leader of the revolution. See? We need to take up those problems that we would take up that are not very well explained in books, that we have to use our own imagination, as commented will be in the struggle, and know. A black revolutionary leader that has to come into a white town in Mississippi has a problem. A white one in a black area may have a problem too, of a different kind. Nationality is important when you present yourself to the public, and who the public is at a particular time if you're seeking mass support. quite a number of members of the enlarged Central Committee were from the peasants. Not very influential, but very important. Now, in this book that I can't find the quotation right now, that's why I'm speaking off the cuff most of the time, Lenin is meeting with Trotsky's meeting with a delegation of peasants. And it's an opportunity for him, see. And he's telling him, look, you are the masters of this house. This house belongs to you. You are the leaders of it. You're along with the workers you lead. You're the leaders of it, see. And surely that should be persuasive when he, and in his capacity as a leader, is saying this. At this time, he may be either the foreign minister or the defense minister. He had at least one of the two posts. He's second in command. But it is becoming evident that being in command and having the leadership is very important officially. But you also have to have your ear to the ground as to whether you are popular with the mass. Trotsky was very popular in Petrograd and in Leningrad, in Petrograd and in Moscow. He always had the largest audience, and the audiences were rousing for him. They always asked for him. But those were audiences of workers. Or politicals. It's another matter when you're stretching out over the vast land of the U.S., of old Russia with its millions and millions of peasants. And you have to see them the way they are. That they are mainly interested in the land and how to get it. And that's Trotsky. He always pointed out that the peasantry was more concerned with the land and not with the proletarian revolution as a whole. A lot of this has to be understood as you get down to the masses. As you get down, and even though it is a dictatorship of the proletariat, you nevertheless cannot rely on that. You need to get mass support. The proletariat is a minority class. They try now more than ever to widen the area of Bolshevik support, because no sooner have we taken over, no sooner are we the dictatorship of the proletariat, and soon enough we have the entire imperialist bourgeoisie against us. See? All right. We can win the peasantry because we have the soldiers. I assume Trotsky would say that many times. And the peasant soldiers are with us. And that is eminently true. But the soldiers want to go home. They don't want to stay in the army. As long as they're in the army, they are a disciplined army under the leadership of Trotsky. And his leadership is eminently regarded everywhere. But the army wants to go home. They want to land. That's what has been promised to them all along. And if we don't release them, if we don't demobilize, they will start going there by themselves and deserting their posts. and the possibility of organizing an army without the backing of millions of peasants will become more and more difficult. That has to be borne in mind by us in discussing the permanent revolution. See? It has to be borne in mind. It has to be borne in mind the difference between Lenin and Trotsky as strategists and tacticians as well. They both had an unusual sense as to where they are in history and an understanding the mass movement at certain times. But understanding them and seeing the movement change under new circumstances is something else. The longer the struggle continues, the more difficult it gets for Trotsky to uphold himself as the most popular leader, sometimes more popular than Lenin. But the situation is changing. More and more peasants become officials, and properly so. And they hold their congresses and have organizations. And more of the working class become organized, and the more backward elements of the workers come into. That is very important, organizing them so that they do not become captives of the bourgeoisie. See, being able to do this and maintain that the dictatorship of the proletariat under iron discipline becomes more and more a problem on how do you administer the new worker state. See? This is important. See? I'm glad I raised the question of the peasantry in its proper historical perspective. Trotsky was masterly in organizing the Red Army. But the Red Army was not to be a permanent institution with millions and millions of peasants in it. Who could afford it? Not Russia. Who could afford to have them? If we would not release them, they would desert. And besides that, who's going to feed the population if not the new soldiers coming up? The peasantry become very key. How to deal with them was very important. And having the right people to deal with the peasantry becomes important. I, as a city worker, I don't know how I would do in rural Alabama, but if you need a representative from the party, I think we'd better send Bill Dorries down there, who's at least from South Carolina, that knows what to do. We'll get John Anderson back and some other. We need to have workers from all areas and to win them over. They can go into areas where it is easier for them to explain the party program and to promote working class internationalism, working class solidarity, working class solidarity with the oppressed people everywhere. See? That's a big job for the workers, an ultimate big job. Now, these are parts of my understanding of the issue as to how the revolution went. We all know that Trotsky, as I said, became the chairman of the St. Petersburg Soviet when he came back the second time to Russia and immediately became the chairman of the St. Petersburg Soviet. I said that at the last time, but I think I'm mistaken. I think I'm mistaken that he was the chairman of the St. Petersburg Soviet. But what I'm not mistaken is that he became the chairman of the Military Revolutionary Committee. That's what he became. And it was the Military Revolutionary Committee that planned the insurrection and carried it through. See? That is of undeniable significance. And neither Stalin, nor the older CP, nor the new people that are in the South, in Russia, can deny that, because it was a fact carried through the world press everywhere. He organized it, but under the leadership of Lenin, see. He organized it. Lenin oversaw the whole operation. But he's the one that was right at the controls. And having done that, he had organized the first successful proletarian revolution in Russia. Now, at this time, I would like to call to your attention as to how to read the history of the Russian Revolution. See, there is, first of all, Trotsky's history in 3 volumes. That's more extensive than any that I know. And I dare say I haven't read many more than that of Trotsky's and John Reed's book and several smaller portions. But we all were brought up, at least in the Trotskyist movement, as it was during Trotsky's lifetime, by reading his account of the Russian Revolution. And it is explicit and illuminating and readable as only a genius of a writer knows how to do. It has one fault, and I can't explain how in the world that happens, see, is that he has hundreds and hundreds of quotations from leaders and rank-and-file workers and peasants and everywhere. But he doesn't give the source. He being the most controversial one in Russia, particularly, and having no credibility with the CP after Lenin's death, how in the world could he write this book and have all these quotations and not give the source? Now, some of those who follow Trotsky's writings say that they check the sources, the people at the Harvard University, and they find the sources to be accurate. But who are they? And how can you get credibility for it? See? It's utterly inexplicable to me, but it does have this. You read it and you feel that it is correct and that it is honest as the day is long. That the way it's described, hundreds of quotations from different leaders and so on, but the sources are not given. I know when I write an article, Comrade Deirdre or David, the first thing I'll say, well, where's your source for this? And pretty soon, I spend more time getting the source than writing the article. But it's necessary to put it in, except if it's well known, then okay, you let it go. But it's very important to give the source. Now, aside from Trotsky's history, which is the main source, there's also John Reed's book, 10 Days That Shook the World. See, that was written almost in the heat of the revolution. Now, John Reed, I should state, was a Harvard student who, like some others, became very excellent reporters. But he soon became one of the contributors of The Masses, which is a radical, magazine. Something like The Guardian, but very revolutionary. Nothing like The Guardian. I see we're in the right company, hey. He did that, see. And he covered a big strike in New York. I don't have the name of it right now. A big strike, and proved himself to be an excellent labor reporter. He went to Mexico and supported the revolutionary side. So all over he was a and when he got to Russia, that was the big thing in his life, to be able to report the Russian Revolution. He had previously reported on the imperialist war. Top-notch professor and revolutionary. And so he wrote 10 Days That Shook the World, which is a short book, and gives the best account. Now, I couldn't find the first edition of the book, which is important. Now, do I have it anywhere? Okay, thank you. Where does it start? Now, there are many different editions of this book and many different interpretations, but the original one is the one that I'm concerned with. I want to thank Comrade Desiree for finding it for me so that I could read a very important paragraph or two in it. It's important, these 2 or 3 paragraphs, because they're written by Lenin. See, Lenin writing a sort of an introduction to this book. I'd like to read to you what he says. Introduction by Lenin, it says. With the greatest interest, with never slackening attention, I read John Reed's book, 10 Days That Shook the World. Unreservedly do I recommend it to the workers of the world. Here is a book which I should like to see published in millions of copies and translated in all languages of the world. It gives a truthful and most vivid exposition of the events so significant to the comprehension of what really is the proletarian revolution and the dictatorship of the proletarian. The problems are vividly discussed, but before one can accept or reject these ideas, he must understand the full significance of his discussion. John Reed's book will undoubtedly help to clear this question, which is the fundamental problem of the universal workers' movement. The word universal doesn't really sound right, but it's probably a poor translation. So, you see, here's Lenin writing about this book, 10 Days That Shook the World. And it's a very good and illuminating book. I read it many years ago. I didn't find it as interesting as Trotsky's book, Natural, in later years, which goes into more detail and is more oriented with the factions. But this is the source book. This is what Lenin considered the revolution. And he unreservedly recommended it. And he put his name on it. And if we want to get Lenin's view of the revolution at that time, that's it. There could be no doubt about it. John Reed was considered such an important figure in revolutionary history of Russia. He died there, and he's the only one that's buried in the Kremlin who was a foreigner. I don't know if that's a distinction, but kind of a hero in literature, and particularly in reporting. Now, the problem with the book is not a problem with the book, there's no problem. The problem is with the leaders of the revolution. They look at this book and say, well, where am I here? Where am I? Where am I Trotsky? Where am I Stalin? Where am I Marta? Maybe I'm not here at all. What's Lenin doing all this? What's the idea endorsing a book by a foreigner? Nevertheless, that is the book. And I think if we want to seriously consider the revolution, we must consider it from the point of view of Lenin first. We have to, in our period, not have so much of an exposition of the relations of Stalin to Trotsky, or Trotsky to Stalin, or what their struggle was about, which is very, very important. But we must see it from where Lenin is sitting, and how Lenin views the struggle between them. See? We are Leninists first, as Trotsky said later. We are Leninists first. And Lenin writes from the point of view of the party. And he discusses Lenin and Trotsky. He's got the party in mind. And when they wants to suggest to remove Stalin from a post, it's in the interest of the party. If he can see his way clear in not removing him, he will do that. He will do what is necessary for the party, for the development of the party. He is head and shoulders above them all, and they are, most of all, in a lot of ways, his pupils. He can write a letter, as you can see, saying that he's going to resign and all that, but nobody's going to listen to it. He has prestige and authority over and above that which is necessary to be the premier leader. Over and over again, he's looking for new people to get into the party, writing and saying, well, there's a new guy that just comes from this area, and I think he's wonderful. Look him up. Get him into it. See to it that he gets development, and so on. He or she. That's Lenin all over. But with the party as a whole, after the insurrection and after their power, they're not so anxious to get new people. There's now comradely rivalry and cooperation, even under the best of circumstances. What leader gets in what post? When you write an article for Pravda, what kind of space do you get, or are you get any? See? All of these things come in important. See, we're attempting to develop a revolutionary class-conscious workers' class. We've got to deal with a lot of these problems, as we are. And we learn how, from the Bolshevik Party, how they dealt with how you can leave a problem alone and let it fester for a while, or maybe it'll die by itself, but how to vigorously intervene so that it doesn't get any worse. And contrary to what has often been said, that the Bolshevik Party is undemocratic and so on, overall it's not true. It is undemocratic only in the sense that it doesn't allow indiscipline. But even in Stalin's time, the care was in expelling. See, it's only after it began to go backwards, see, that's what happened. Now, we've got to leave this time just after the insurrection and the way, and that's really the victory after the Trotsky as the military revolutionary leader of the committee. The party has the power, and how from the very beginning it's a question as who gets what post under these circumstances, and whereas just a few months ago, when the Bolsheviks had to run for their life, and people were deserting the party because it seemed that the counter-revolution was going to win. Right now, with victory having been attained in a military way, all of them are all coming back. And a lot of people are pushing and elbowing their way into the party. But it takes only a year and a half or two when the Bolsheviks again are under threat of being destroyed by a combination of imperialist powers, and when a lot of people who were in suddenly had disappeared and they're not around, and when you need them for a meeting, they're not there, or they're sick, or their mother is sick, or whatever. They're not at meetings where they should be, and they're not at the place of work either. And the situation requires iron discipline, and no one speaks more about iron discipline than Lenin. But on the contrary, it is not of a vindictive type. I just want to add one more sentence before we conclude this part. In order to be able to carry the dictatorship through, as soon as the imperialists began to invade and the bourgeoisie got more confidence in itself and began to attack the Bolsheviks from all sides, and even attempted to assassinate Lenin, the Bolsheviks organized a campaign that, which in so many words said this: you, the bourgeoisie at home and the imperialists abroad, you are organizing a white terror against us. You are terrorizing it. You're using terrorist methods to destroy our party, to destroy our individuals, to break up the functioning of discipline in the factories. You're sabotaging transportation and everything. You're carrying out a white terror. Well, that being the case, we're organizing a red terror against you. And let me tell you, that was the right thing to do. See, this was very important in saving the revolution. There might have been excesses here and there, but that goes with the situation. So it's not just Stalin that was for terror. First of all, the bourgeoisie organized the terror. And then Lenin organized the Red Terror. And it had to be that if the Republic, if the Socialist Republic would survive. So before we even think of considering the terror that was organized by Stalin at a later date, let's see the sequence of events so that we'll be able to understand the process altogether. as a social process from the very beginning to the end. We have got to master this as a tool to organize the hundreds of thousands and the millions in this country. It is necessary for us to understand how the most skillful and the most revolutionary leaders dealt with a situation that is very much what we will have to consider and which we consider daily in our lives. When we study the party from various points of view, we can see ourselves and our problems. That is why we study it. And because we study it, we will assimilate it, and we will organize the working class for a revolutionary victory.